Victorian era was a booming time for all sorts of transportation devices. The era of the horse and carriage, long beloved, gradually began to make room for things like the steamer ship, the passenger train, and even a rudimentary bicycle. With these innovations that began to take hold, citizens of the Britain and British Commonwealth began to see more travelling around the world.
Today marks the beginning of our long journey to a new home. Father, Perry and I will be moving from our hometown of Northampton to the strange and terrifying land Father calls Australia. I don't want to go, and all I know is that it's going to take a very, very long time.
Horse-drawn carriages remained popular well throughout the Victorian era, until the late 1890s when bicycles and automobiles began to flourish. Even when more efficient forms of transportation, such as trains, became known, often people in inaccessible areas still would use carriages.
Since we have no railway to get to Manchester, we're going to have to take a hansom cab there. Ruth says it's a racy vehicle and that we shouldn't be going in a gentleman's car. But Father says it's all right.
Most people don't know that there is actually more than the typical type of carriage you know when you think of horse-drawn carriages. There was the hansom cab, named after A.J. Hansom, was a two-wheeler that was considered generally a pretty racy car and improper for upper-class ladies to ride in. There was the Brougham, which was your typical four-wheeler carriage, and the Clarence, which most people called a growler because of the sound it made on the cobblestone streets.
All our luggage is packed in the carriage, a sleek thing. I'm glad we were able to get a hansom cab instead of a wagon. More than slightly worried about the effect that the length of the trip will have on the children though. You know, people like us don't really travel, we stay, or we take day trips on the railway to London. I worry, I really do. However, we know that horse-drawn carriages were not the only way to get around back then. The steam engine had been in use since the 18th century, but it wasn't until an inventor named Richard Trevithick had the idea of improving it by tying it onto a cart so that it could haul large loads at one time. The main reason why railways were there was the boom of the Industrial Revolution, and people needed some way to trade bulk things in a short amount of time. Because previously, the only way to get from point A to point B was by horse.
Since the 16th century, basic tracks have been built, and miners often use carts on the tracks pulled by horses to deliver coal. But this was expensive, inefficient, and only used for short distances. However, especially with the introduction of the Manchester to Liverpool Railway, among other passenger railways, suddenly there was a new way to get around and transport cargo quickly.
At last! I thought that carriage ride would never end. Add the train ride and my head is feeling woozy beyond compare. We're in Liverpool now. It's very cold since it's up north, and we went on a train ride passing through all this wintry landscape, which was very pretty. Perry says that all the towns in England someday are going to be connected by trains, but I don't believe that. How are they going to make all those trains?
I have to say, I'm very pleased with the Liverpool-Manchester Railway. It's been going for at least 35 years, but it's still popular as ever. In its first year only, it transported about 500,000 people. It makes a fortune shipping goods, I'm told.
The Liverpool and Manchester Railway was around 31 miles long and completed in 1831. The initial aim of the track was to provide a viable route between Manchester, which was the textile capital of England, and Liverpool, which was essentially the most important port of its time in Britain. A lot of people, however, opposed it, such as the directors of the Bridgewater Canal, which operated at the time bringing goods back and forth, as well as numerous coach drivers, understandably.
It was the first successful railway line to open in Britain, although it had a lot of trouble getting going. Firstly, because so many people considered it an economic threat to the canals. Secondly, farmers and aristocracy didn't want tracks on their land, and the government thought that the speed of trains was a health problem for passengers. As well, a lot of Victorians were wary of men and women riding in the same train car together. However, it proved to be an immense economic and social gain for England.
The steamship was an amazing invention in a time when most people were skeptical of new inventions. Its major advantage was that you could really go anywhere, whereas with a sail-driven ship you could only sail in the direction which the wind allowed. Especially as world trade increased when the British Empire was in its prime, people realized that British ships were going to need to be bigger, faster, and better than those of, say, the US or Germany.
When we arrived in Liverpool, I thought I was going to get lost. There are so many bustling people and places to explore. We're going on the SS Great Britain, the finest ship of her day. It makes regular journeys from Liverpool to Australia, and it's a steamship instead of the sail ships I saw in my picture book. So Father says it's going to be a lot faster.
I've bought 3 one-way tickets from Liverpool to Australia on the Great Britain for Perry, Ruth and me. I'm very apprehensive that it's a steamship though. People say they're a freak of an invention that shouldn't have happened. And although I don't believe that, I've never been on one before. Who knows what's going to happen?
How it started was the idea that you could utilize air pressure to make a steamboat move. If you created a vacuum in a cylinder, a piston could move inside it, and the resulting power could be used to turn a paddle wheel. This was a very rudimentary design at first, but it worked, and passenger and cargo ships started to be built more like this.
In the beginning of their days, steamships were made out of wooden planks. Near the middle to late 1800s, however, the size had pretty much reached its limit, around 340 feet long, and these wooden ships could weigh up to 7,000 tons. The problem with these, however, is that there wasn't as much room for cargo, and they required very large amounts of crew to man them, as well as being more prone to small leaks in the hull planking.
The SS Great Britain was an amazing ship. It was built by the Great Western Railway Company at Patterson's Shipyard in 1838, and it was just beautiful. It was lighter than a wooden hull ship, but it was a behemoth, displacing around 3,620 tons of water and had 15,000 square foot of sail material, although that usually didn't need to be used.
It's so big. It's 100 meters long and the hull is an inch thick, so even sea monsters won't be able to sink it. There are so many people on it, I know we're going to have a splendid time.
One of the more interesting facts about the Great Britain is that it actually ran aground in Ireland one year during a storm, and the water level was so low they couldn't get her out until 6 months later, after being battered by the weather numerous times. They finally got her in the water again, and she was completely intact, hardly a dent. That, I think, is why most captains made the switch to iron hulls.
In effect, after Victorians got over their fear of the unknown, they really managed to create new innovations and be pioneers of new technology that helped their world move forward. From the horse-drawn carriages to the Liverpool-Manchester rail trip to the SS Great Britain, we can see the Victorian era in transportation through this family's eyes and see what it was really like. All historians are like, historians.
Be talk with.
Made out of wooden planks.
Okay, just repeat.
Yeah, whole planking, that is so much better.
But you said that it's so much,
Hull.
like halfway between. Yeah.
Halfway between hull and hull.
Yeah, so hull.
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 Hull. Yeah, that's good. Hull.
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 Okay.